Yeah, let's go ahead and begin. I will try to reach out to Mansour. If you want to begin with our introductions here, I'll put up the... so let's go through the housekeeping one more time.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'll do housekeeping one more time. If you have not done so, please type in your name, your affiliation, and your country into the chat so the participants can know who's present. We'll ask you to keep your microphones muted unless you need to speak to avoid any feedback. You'll be able to post questions in the question and answer feature in the chat, and this will be responded to later on. We'll select the questions. During the Q&A session, you can raise your hand. Please note the webinar is being live cast and recorded, so please be courteous and objective in all of your comments. And note that the presentations will be available online later on the through the Eventleaf website. We're going to go ahead and begin now, and Zeb will take over, and she will do the initial introductions.
Thank you, Kevin. So I will be your host for this webinar, and Kevin is the co-host and will be leading some of the session with me. Intro.
I can put my screen up to introduce Dr.
Let me go through my, it's okay. Let me go through and I'll stop mine for your part. So welcome again. The Nile Basin Initiative, in collaboration with the government of Ethiopia, is organizing a series of webinars under the 6th Nile Basin Development Forum. The theme for this webinar is rethinking regional investment in the Nile Basin, and we are hoping to bring together NBI with its stakeholder and Nile Basin country and around the world. The themes include water resource management, environment and wetlands, water energy food nexus, adaptation to climate change, transboundary water governance. The goal of Nbdf is to enhance transformation process in projects that will contribute to Nile Basin shared vision, which is achieving sustainable socio-economic development through equitable utilization of and benefit from the common Nile Basin water resources. This session, RO2, is dedicated for developing approach and option of reservoir coordination in the Nile Basin. We are hoping to address some leading questions on the 3 areas. Why is it necessary to coordinate in the Nile Basin? And the existing coordination, how realistic is it? And what kind of institution and process must exist to coordinate reservoir for our basin? At the end of the webinar, we are expecting to have different outcomes, and the major ones is having an understanding of the gap between optimal and practical reservoir coordination, and identifying of promising framework and approach for coordinating reservoir.
Zeb, your slides have not changed on it. It still says housekeeping.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay, let me share again. What about now?
It's not sharing yet. Here we go. Okay, we have your general PowerPoint now.
Okay.
It says program.
Okay, what about now? Good?
Yeah, we have the program now.
Okay, so we will have opening session by Dr. Sally, followed by a keynote speech by Kevin, Dr. Kevin. And we will have a series of presentation. And after the presentation, we'll have a Q&A followed by panel discussion. And at the final stage, we'll have a wrap up and key messages. So I will give the floor to Dr. Sally, and Kevin can project his slide. Kevin, can you project your slide?
I'll do a quick introduction here, or exactly.
I will introduce Dr. Sally and you follow.
Okay.
So I will welcome Dr. Sally to give an opening remark. Just to give you a little bit background about Dr. Sally. Dr. Sally joined the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation as an assistant researcher in 1984. He continues to provide his research in different units and positions through Director of Planning and Coordinator at Irrigation Water Corporation. He is Associate Research Professor at Hydropower Research Center, and he managed of civil work at Gazira Irrigation and Rehabilitation Scheme. He is a head of National DSS Unit and a Senior Water Resource Specialist at Water Resource Technical Organ, Director of Nile Water Directorate, and lately he was a Chair of Water Resource Technical Organ. Dr. Sally has specific experience coming to the Nile Basin Initiative. He has worked as National Coordinator since 2007 up to 2012, a Chair of Permanent Joint Technical Commission on Nile Water, and he was part of CFA discussion since 2001. He is a member of NSAP leader and Nile TAC. He is a member of National Commission on Preparation and Implementation of different projects in NBI and NSAP Fast Track project. Some of the projects include Watershed, Sudan Transmission Interconnection, Flood and Preparedness, Power Trade, and Joint Multipurpose Program. When we come to his educational background, he did his BSc in Civil Engineering in University of Khartoum and Masters in Hydrology, and his PhD in Water Management from University of Gazira in 2006. So Dr. Sally, welcome, and I will give the floor for your opening remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our moderators, Engineer Azib and Dr. Kevin. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I am honored by the organizing committee to welcome you to this important session on developing approaches and options for reservoir coordination in the Nile Basin. It's my pleasure to be among such distinguished experts and professionals. My special thanks to our keynote speaker, Dr. Kevin Wheeler, our panelist, Dr. Yelma Seleshi and Dr. Malt Rusman. I don't see he's around or not, I am not sure. And to all our presenters. As we know, the NBI countries are facing tremendous challenges hydraulically. The Nile Basin characterized by variable rainfall and unreliable in most areas of the basin, associated with floods and drought hazards in some areas. This is coupled with the population increase and an ever-increasing demand for water to meet the continuous rise in socioeconomic needs. The question is how to ensure that water resources development and management in the Nile Basin is implemented in a coordinated and mutually beneficial manner to sustainably meet the future needs. This session's issue of developing approaches and options for reservoir coordination in the Nile Basin is closely related to the efforts of finding visible approaches to this question or to that question. The first phase of the water resources strategy analysis in the Nile Basin project, led by the Nile Set, is implemented with the objective of meeting the ever-growing demand and use of the basin water resources in a sustainable manner for all the Nile riparian countries. One of the options is to consider reservoir coordination. All regional studies on the Nile Basin have ensured that coordination or cooperation on the Nile Basin water resources development and management will result in huge benefits. To name some: increased food, energy, and navigation, etc., efficient use of the resource, protection of the ecosystems, reduction of costs, and reduction of regional tensions. The NBI countries can learn from the international river basin experience. For example, the Senegal River Basin Development Authority was created in 1972, following several years of severe drought, and it has succeeded to systematically implement the principle of equitable sharing of benefits from the dams, from its jointly owned infrastructures constructed in the river basin. Two large dams, that is Manantali Dam in Mali and Maka Diama Dam downstream on the Mauritania-Senegal border. Benefits include drinking water supply to urban centers, some sharing of 800 gigawatt hours per year, and irrigated land of about 375,000 hectares. In USA and Mexico cooperatively manage the Colorado River water and infrastructure to improve water availability during drought, generate hydropower, and to restore and protect riverine ecosystems. And we know that the benefits are in billions of dollars. USA and Canada also, they are cooperating in Columbia River, which has 14 dams in its main stream only. Of course, there is others on the branches or in the tributaries, of which 3 are in Canada and 11 in USA. Benefits are shared. The dams address a variety of demands, including flood control, navigation, storage and delivery of stored water, and generation of hydropower. In Brazil, between Brazil and Paraguay, there is the Itapu hydroelectric dam is the world's second largest operational hydroelectric power plant in terms of installed power. The dam is jointly constructed, that is owned by Paraguay and Brazil, and the hydropower generated is shared. Paraguay can sell its excess share of hydropower directly to the Brazilian companies. Therefore, international experience shows that dams coordination can be comprehensive, including joint ownership, planning, design, construction, and operation, and sharing the benefit, and can take the form of only coordinated operation. Directly accrued benefits are huge from the river, for the river, due to the river, and beyond the river, billions of dollars per year. The current level of coordination among the Nile Basin countries in the field of reservoirs is far below expectations. With the exception of Oin Dam in Uganda, it's voluntary, not governed by any bilateral or regional agreement, and is absent in some critical areas. However, it is slowly progressing. Intro's ambition is to achieve comprehensive coordination of water resources development and management in the Eastern Nile sub-basin, including all aspects of reservoir planning, design, construction, and operation of existing dams, and joint ownership and operation of future dams, since reservoirs are major means of water resource development and management. Intro's effort to achieve the cooperation goal among the Nile Basin riparians can be put into 3 areas: demonstrating the benefit of cooperation through the preparation and facilitation, the implementation of water resources investment projects, like the IDIM projects, multi-sectorial investment opportunity analysis project, GMP project, BAS, that is Baro Akobo Sobat project, groundwater atlas, Mashar marshes. These are just examples. Second, demonstrating the benefit of cooperation through the implementation of projects that facilitate and encourage investment in water resources. So, examples like coordination of operation of cascade dams, dam safety project, flood forecast and early warning system project. The third is facilitating cooperation through enhanced regional dialogue among the Eastern Nile countries. Examples: hydro diplomacy, building capacity in negotiation skills, media and communication training. Another example, Hydromed project led by the Nile SEC, water resource strategy analysis project also led by the Nile SEC, dialogue among the Eastern Nile countries, internship for young professionals, and capacity building, which is a cross-cutting issue in all those projects. So let me, at this point, thank our development partners, the World Bank, SIWA, GIZ, the German government, and the EU for their assistance. Without their support, the above have not been achieved. Effort of Intro and other MBI centers will continue to pave the way for institutionalized cooperation in the Nile Basin, as that is the only way to achieve prosperous life for the Nile Basin people and prevent tension in the region that jeopardize development and regional peace. It's my belief that developing options and approaches for reservoir in the Nile Basin is more comprehensive than just coordinating the operation. And I am sure our distinguished presenters will discuss this complex issue and come up with recommendations that enlighten our way for consolidated cooperation among the Nile Basin countries. With these words, let me welcome again our keynote speaker, the panelists, and the presenters. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleh. It's very, we really appreciate your opening remark. It's very insightful. You gave us the international experience compared to NBI experience and what we have done as intro and mentioning most of our achievements, which you put it really well. Thank you very much. Kevin, you want to add something, or shall I proceed to your session?
I think we can go on to mine.
Okay. So now we'll go to a keynote speech by Dr. Kevin Wheeler, on international approach for reservoir coordination, reflecting on two great rivers, Nile and Colorado River. To give you background information about Kevin Wheeler, is from University of Oxford. His research and experience focus upon the shared management of transboundary water course, emphasizing multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder negotiation, cooperation, and cooperative planning to manage environmental risk through multi-objective infrastructure. Since 2000, Dr. Wheeler has worked on multiple issues surrounding the Colorado River, including facilitating the successful negotiation between USA and Mexico in 2012. Kevin has contributed a lot in his research to the Nile River Basin by exploring cooperative development pathway among the co-riparian countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Dr. Wheeler is an associate editor of the journal Water International in advisory for the future of Colorado River Project and former researcher of fellowship sustainable science at Harvard School of Government. He did his PhD in University of Oxford and Master in Water Science, University of Oxford, and he have another master's from University of Colorado and a background in civil engineering from University of Colorado for his BSc. Dr. Kevin, welcome. You can proceed with your keynote speech. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. What I want to start out with too is recognizing the high quality of panelists we have, in addition to Dr. Saleh, who has a very extensive background on the Nile and was until recently leading a lot of the negotiations on behalf of Sudan. We also have distinguished panelists, which I'm going to mention these first two right now, Dr. Yilmaz Salishi, who's an associate professor of water resources at Addis Ababa University, and many publications in rainfall, rainfall variability, predictability, hydrology, water quality, extensive experience. He was also a member of the International Panel of Experts for the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and continues to represent the Ethiopian government in the negotiations over management in light of the GERD. He was the director of the Ethiopian Institute of Water Resources and Addis Ababa University, and served as the director in the USAID, University of Connecticut, Addis Ababa University cooperation on building capacity amongst the 5 Ethiopian universities. So extremely good experience with his PhD in hydrology from Brussels, as well as his other degrees from Brussels and Addis Ababa University. Now, I also, before I talk about Colorado, I also want to make sure, I want to bring in, we have Dr. Terry Fulp on here, Terrence Fulp, a longtime friend and colleague I've worked with for many years. Dr. Fulp was a former regional director for the Bureau of Reclamation, the US government, of the Lower Colorado River Basin. He was headquartered in Boulder City, Nevada, and a region that encompasses about 700 miles of the Colorado River down to the Mexican border, including the states of Arizona, Nevada, California. For 31 years, he worked as for the federal government and was responsible for a lot of the implementation of the Secretary of the Interior's functions on the river. Now, Dr. Fulp was also the area manager of the Hoover Dam, and he led the technical negotiations between the United States and Mexico over a negotiation. While I was working on that, Dr. Fulp was really the leader in that. So I'm honored to have him here. For the last 20 years, all through my work on the Colorado, he's been leading the negotiations between the states, really facilitating that process. So he has a very, very strong experience across the Colorado River, and we're very honored to have him here as well. He did his PhD at the Colorado School of Mines, as well as master's degrees in University of Colorado, same place I went, as well as Stanford University and Tulsa University. So just some background of the quality of people we have as the panelists, and we'll introduce the speakers as we go along. So I'm going to start my presentation now on the keynote. So titled Incremental Approaches to Reservoir Coordination, Reflections on These Two Rivers. And we have, again, experts from both of these rivers here. We can see where they're located, vastly, very far away from each other, but they have a great number of similarities and differences we're going to explore a little bit. So on those similarities and differences, we want to think about what are the critical elements for success for a river basin? How were different problems overcome across these river basins? And what are some of the useful lessons that could be shared across this wide space and across these two river basins? So to get a little bit of context, the Colorado River is different in many, many ways. And some of the key ways, it's only 2 countries versus the Nile River, which covers across 11 countries. 40 million inhabitants in the basin for the Colorado River versus 250 million in the Nile. The average annual flow is about 20 billion cubic meters versus about 84 billion cubic meters for the Nile. And we can see that the water per person, if you divide that, it's 500 cubic meters per person per year versus 336. Both have very large irrigated areas, and both have extremely large hydropower capacities. So while there's differences, there's also a lot of similarities. Both basins developed very unevenly through time. Agricultural uses dominate across both basins. By far, the biggest water user is agriculture. Extensive hydropower generation and hydropower potential across both river basins. Municipal needs are growing and will continue to grow. So sometimes less water being used in agriculture, more water being used in for municipal needs. And all or almost all the water is being consumed in both of the river basins. And part of that result is major environmental concerns in both basins as well. So the uneven development aspect, as we know here in the Nile, at the current state, Egypt and Sudan use the vast majority of water in the Nile. So this is the extracted water coming from the Nile. So only about 2 to 3% of the water removed from the Nile, removed from the river, is by the other countries. So the vast majority of Egypt and Sudan, based on how they developed through the years. On the hydropower capacity, we can see that Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia had the largest share of hydropower capacity, and Uganda as well. But Egypt being the largest, and of course, Ethiopia is soon poised to increase their hydropower capacity or the installed capacity significantly with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. If we look over to the Colorado River, it's also had a history of uneven development. In 1950, California became a state, and that was followed by Nevada in 1964, Colorado in 1876 in Colorado, Wyoming a little bit later, Utah 1896, New Mexico and Arizona became states in 1912. So across a period of about 64 years, as all these states became part of the United States. Now at the time, and still in a lot of ways, the dominant paradigm of water right is first in time, first in right, what we call prior appropriations. Well, that's a rational basis to allocate water in some senses, but it also would lead to large inequities depending on who developed first. And we note here California developed first. So shortly after all these states were part of the United States, the law of the river began developing. So in 1922, the Colorado River Compact was signed between the 7 states. And what this did is allocated the 3 lower basin states, Arizona, Nevada, and California. They agreed to have 7.5 million acre feet, which is about 9.25 billion cubic meters. And the upper basin states also were allocated 9.25 billion cubic meters. Now there was to deal with variability, they agreed that every 10 years, the upper basin states had to provide the lower basin states no less than 75 million acre feet over a 10-year period. That's how they dealt with variability. Now it wasn't until 1944 that the USA and Mexico signed a treaty that would allocate 1.5 million acre feet or 1.85 billion cubic meters to Mexico that they could get guaranteed every year. Now, the challenges of uneven development, we can see that California developed first in the Colorado River. And even today, upper basin states of Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, they want to continue extracting more water. Similarly, Egypt and Sudan developed first in the Nile Basin, and more abstractions are planned for Ethiopia, South Sudan, Kenya, Rwanda upstream, as well as Sudan and Egypt have unmet demands downstream as well. So the water is fully used in both basins essentially. Upstream still plans to develop more, and there needs to be plans for coordinated and additional uses, both of consumptive and non-consumptive uses. So this is common in both basins. What are some of the key differences? Well, the distribution of infrastructure is a key difference. If we look at the Colorado River, here's a map of the basin, we can see some major reservoirs across the basin. And we have water flowing into the largest reservoir upstream, which is called Lake Powell, at about 30 billion cubic meters. Then water flows to the second reservoir, which is called Lake Mead, at 32 billion cubic meters, that has the iconic Hoover Dam. And then water flows through some smaller reservoirs out to the Gulf of California. But before it does, it crosses the international border of Mexico. Now, Egypt, Egypt, on the other hand, is on the downstream end of the Nile. So here's the string of reservoirs from the Blue Nile down. Now the White Nile flows from Lake Victoria to the city of Khartoum. And the Blue Nile flows from Ethiopia through these major reservoirs and continues on. The first flows through the Gerd Reservoir is the largest one. And then it flows onward north through the large reservoirs of Meroe and the High Aswan Dam, and crosses multiple borders. So at least every drop of water that falls in the Blue Nile crosses 2 international borders. So our distribution of infrastructure, it's important to note that the US has 7 different states, and even though there's 2 countries, there's 7 different US states and 2 states in Mexico. and the Nile has 11 different countries. Upstream, the USA controls, or they can store up to 4 times the average annual flow, while downstream, Mexico has no storage capacity within their reservoirs. On the Nile, Egypt downstream can currently store about 1.5 times the average annual flow, while upstream in Ethiopia, they'll soon be able to store about 1.2 times the average annual flow at that location. So some major differences. The Colorado, the USA manages all the infrastructure, and deliveries are obligatory to Mexico. The USA has to make these deliveries to Mexico, but coordination between the United States, between the different states, is absolutely critical. Technical coordination for sure. On the Nile, international infrastructure coordination will be immediately critical because it crosses so many borders. So these two rivers are similar but different. So the Colorado River, water flows into one large reservoir, continues on to another large reservoir, and then flows through a series of smaller reservoirs before crossing the border into Mexico. On the Nile, if we start from the Blue Nile, the Abai, water will flow into the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, cross one international border into some smaller reservoirs, which are the Rosaires Dam, the Sennar Dam, receive water from the White Nile before it comes into the Meroe Dam, and then can cross another international border into the High Aswan Dam. So it looks very different in some ways. However, we notice there's some key similarities. Both systems are dominated by 2 large reservoirs. And in both systems, there are small reservoirs that are immediately downstream from large reservoirs. We're going to pick those two apart a little bit. So 2 large reservoirs generate some opportunities. One, it creates operational flexibility. You can minimize the evaporation losses. You can coordinate for regional hydropower. And with 2 large reservoirs, it can help to endure longer drought periods. It also comes with risks. Any disjointed management of droughts can be a risk for sure. Flood risks without joint planning can be potentially dangerous. And even the perception of risk is affected by 2 different reservoirs. Imagine a drought is occurring and people within Egypt even if there's a drought occurring, they may be blaming Ethiopia on how they're operating the Renaissance Dam, just the misperception. So there's a very strong need to communicate what the real risks are when you have 2 large reservoirs. Now let's look at the sequence of a large reservoir to a small reservoir. So going from a large volume to a small volume. So there's opportunities. It allows a reliable release from the upstream reservoir that allows a much more efficient operation of the downstream reservoirs, optimizing for hydropower, optimizing for water delivery. On the other hand, there's risks. Small operational changes to the upstream reservoir can have severe impacts downstream. For example, during a filling period of the reservoir or during a flooding period. Let's give some examples of that. Of course, we see today with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Now in this, we can see the smaller reservoir, the Rosaires Reservoir, downstream with 5.8 billion cubic meters of storage. And during the next few years, we'll be filling up the Gerd Reservoir with 74 billion cubic meters of storage. Now, in 2020, the reservoir levels would be fairly low in a typical operation, as happened last year with the dam. And as the reservoir in the Gerd began to fill with 4.9 billion cubic meters, they would really have to release water downstream to be able to make sure needs are met. However, of course, there was a temporary reduction of flows during that filling period. Now entering the next year, of course, the Rosaires Dam has refilled and they're going to have to maintain some water. But as the Gerd begins to fill the next 13.5 billion cubic meters, that will have severe impacts and implications in Sudan, of course. Now, Ethiopia can choose and should opt to coordinate to be able to make releases through bottom outlets as well as through their turbines if the turbines are online. And with that, they can continue providing water down to Sudan if it's done in a coordinated manner. So there can be strategic and coordinated releases downstream during this period. and only well-planned information exchange could really be required for safe filling. So making sure that Sudan has the information to be able to deal with what the next year is going to require. Maybe it's the transfer of information. And of course, that'll continue on to the next year, the following years, until the reservoir is ultimately full. So these are very, very important elements of coordination. And of course, the risk in Sudan is, what if there's an unplanned large release and the Sudanese reservoir is full? That does pose a potential safety risk for the Rosaires Dam if there is no coordination. Again, however, the risks can be easily managed with proper communication and proper coordination between the countries. So we'll go back to the Colorado River for a moment and some of the history here. In 1944, the treaty between the United States and Mexico was signed, and that guaranteed an annual delivery of water to Mexico. It also said that shortages to deliveries could occur if there was an extraordinary drought scenario, even though they didn't define what an extraordinary drought was at the time. It also established a minute process by which the treaty could be continuously updated as time went on. Since 1944, there's been 325 minutes to the 1944 treaty that have been signed. 325 small adjustments, adaptations, the countries working together to constantly update and modify that treaty. So for an example, in 1974, this minute 242 to the treaty, the 242nd minute to the treaty, was a very major one. The problem was salinity levels reaching Mexico were very high, too high to use for agriculture. The solution they came up with was to tie the salinity levels between California and Mexico to make sure that those stayed the same. So they wrote a new minute to the treaty that basically stated that the deliveries to Mexico would have an annual average salinity of no more than 115 parts per million relative to that which is delivered at the Imperial Dam. So they worked together very hard to come up with a solution that really demonstrated the power of that minute process, the minute treaty setup. Now in the 2000s, the reservoirs were falling fast. We saw that Lake Mead and Lake Powell were declining and resulted in this very large bathtub ring around the reservoirs during a major drought time. So at that time, the USA states had agreed to reduce their uses, but the question is whether Mexico would also reduce their uses. So the challenge here was drought coordination, incremental international coordination over droughts. So the problem was increasing risk of shortages, and the solution was several minutes that happened after that to address these changes. Well, in 2010, 11 years ago, there was an earthquake that happened that damaged the delivery systems to Mexico, so they can no longer receive all of their water. So minute 318 was born from the treaty, a fast-acting minute that was a good solution where the USA would offer to bank any of that unused water in Lake Mead so Mexico could use it into the future. Now that was followed by minute 319 to the 1944 treaty, which is where I got involved and worked very closely with Dr. Fulp. And they temporarily agreed to share the risk of shortages, to allow more banking of Mexican water in the US, and to make environmental releases. So these were some big breakthroughs in the evolution of the relationship between the United States and Mexico. The USA offering to bank and store water with Mexico's water within the United States. Now we can imagine and envisage some of the potentials in the Nile to be able to bank water that's dedicated for the lower users within the upper reservoirs. Now looking forward, the reservoirs continued to fall. So in 2019, the US states had agreed to a drought contingency plan that would go until 2026. All of these had time limits and when they would expire, then renegotiate, where they would have very close planned reduction of uses. Minute 323 to the 1944 treaty reflected that as well, and the USA and Mexico agreed to take similar reductions until 2026. And of course, those negotiations are up to renewal again in the next 5 years. So a key element of this was using the flexible modeling tools. and in particular in the Colorado River, and this is what we also work with on the Nile, the Reservoir modeling software, a very flexible, policy-oriented modeling tool. So the truth is all multi-reservoir systems have many coordination needs. Operational coordination on the order of days and weeks and months, and planning coordination on longer time scales over years or multiple years. So the operations, joint inflow forecasting, for example, what will the inflows be to the GERD in this year? That's a scientific question that we can use satellites, we can use rain gauges to answer that question. What are the seasonal expectations for releases downstream on an hourly, daily, or monthly basis? This is a plot every month on the Colorado River. They generate a plot of what the most likely releases and elevations will be, and they communicate that to all the downstream users for improved hydropower planning and seasonal flood safety. Regular data exchange is absolutely critical for this process, and no decisions have to be made on water rights for joint operations. So to really separate the notion of water rights to operations. On the planning side, development and exchange of annual operation plans. So an upstream reservoir generates their operational plan on an annual basis, passes it to the downstream reservoirs doing the same. Being able to exchange some of those operations is necessary in any multi-reservoir system, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Europe or anywhere in the world, exchanging of the operation plans on a regular basis. Allowing for joint severe flood management and eventually joint severe drought planning together. So what we're talking about here is incremental strategies to improve coordination. So the notion of commitments for data exchange brings us further along this continuum, which is a well-known plot from Sadoff and Gray, moving from total unilateral actions to some level of coordination just by the notion of data exchange. And I know countries have worked along for that and still is an obstacle and a challenge. Joint inflow forecasting, that's just scientific. Moving further along, how much water is going to be available for that year in general. Commitments to make regular notifications of what the dam releases are, moves us further. Joint planning for flood management, and then joint planning for drought management strategies are all further along that continuum. And further down the road, really integrated hydropower and optimization. But you can't start at the end of this. You have to start at the beginning of this process to really make it work. So again, incremental cooperation to build trust. And that's all I have, but there's a number of publications that I can refer you to, but I will be happy to pass this along and continue this conversation after the end of some of our other presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kevin. It's a very enlightening speech. Your presentation brought new insights from other river basin of Colorado River. And you touched upon very sensitive issue of the basin GERD, and I'm sure some of the key things you mentioned will help in the negotiation process. Your comparison with Colorado historical treaty give real insight how the negotiation should go on. It doesn't have to be a concrete agreement right now, but it can be modified as we go on. So you also mentioned what's needed for multiple reservoir system coordination and increased cooperation strategies, which is very insightful and useful for our basin. Thank you again. It seems you have some questions, but maybe it's better if we go along with the other presentation, right?
Yeah, I think we should continue on, and then we'll do more question and answer as we get through the talk. So please save our questions, and we'll filter through them and get them answered, all the questions we can with our time.
Yeah, while the paper presenters speak, you can prepare yourself to answer some of the questions. Okay. So let's, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue to our paper presenters. We have around 6 presentations, which we will start with Mohammed Bashir. He is a researcher at the University of Manchester. He's doing his PhD. He has done a lot of research on economic and engineering of water system, focusing on the Nile Basin. and extensive publication on the modeling and management of GERD and benefits and impacts. Shall we proceed to Mohammed?
Please, Mohammed, if you're...
Mohammed.
Yeah, start sharing my screen.
Okay, good.
You can see my screen, all right?
Yes.
All right, then thank you very much, organizers, for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some potential impacts of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on Nile riverine floods, and I'm going to do that under cooperative scenario assumption, which is along that continuum, which Kevin just showed us, but at the very start of that continuum. So I'll talk about. I'll talk on first. I have 4 points in my talk. I will give a quick introduction. Then I'll show you some of the assessment methods that I use to simulate the impacts of GERD on riverine flooding in the downstream, and then I'll close with some conclusions. Some background information. Kevin already mentioned some of these. So the GERD is currently under construction. Around 15 kilometers upstream the Ethiopian-Sudanese border, with an expected power capacity of 5,150 megawatts, expected to generate annually, on average, around 15,000 gigawatt hour, and that will roughly double the electricity generation of Ethiopia. The reservoir of the GERD has a storage capacity of around, the overall storage capacity of around 1.5. The average annual flow at the dam site, which provide a huge potential for changing the river flow pattern downstream quite substantially. If we look at the natural flow of the river, so there are a few challenges with managing the Nile water. So there's high variability, both from one year to another and within the year. So if we look at the lower plot, it shows the seasonality of the river flows. The seasonality of the river flows, and the blue band here shows the range within which the daily flows ranged between 1965 and 2019, and we can see that most of the flows happen in around 4 months of the year, from July to August. Around 80% of the flow, whenever it happens in these 4 months. But if we also look at the highest flows, we can see that the flow can go as high as 900 millimeter cube per year, and that's up to 2019. But I heard that last year it even exceeded the 1,000 millimeter cube per day, and that is the main cause of riverine flooding in the downstream. So if we zoom out a little bit and look at the types of floods in Sudan, there are 2 major types. There is riverine floods and there is flash floods. Riverine floods occur because when the river flow exceeds the carrying capacity of the river channel, which results in an overflow to the floodplains. While flash floods happen due to intense local rain and don't have any direct link to the flow in the main channel of the river. What I'm going to be talking about here is the impact on this part of floods in Sudan, and the GERD will have nothing to do with this part. Now, if we look at some Sudanese geography and look at the Sudanese states, so the red lines here delineate the boundaries of the states in Sudan, and there are 18 states. 6 of them are going to be directly impacted by GERD, and that are that touch the Blue Nile or the main Nile. The Blue Nile and main Nile go through them. So these are the ones that will be affected by GERD. If we look at the number of flood-affected people in Sudan from 2012 to 2020, and that is the lower plot here. So this plot shows the percentage of people that have been affected by flood within the GERD-affected states and in the rest of the Sudanese states. And this data comes from the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And we can see that between 2012 and 2020, around 20 to 80% of flood-affected people in Sudan were located in these 6 states that are going to be affected by GERD operation. But it's also important to mention that these 20 to 80% include both flash flood and riverine flood-affected people. Now, let's talk a little bit about the assessment method. So how did I assess the impacts of the GERD on riverine floods in Sudan? So 3 main models. The first one is the river system model. That's a daily river system model of a large part of the Eastern Nile Basin. So in simple words, a river system model blends in the river inflows, the operating rules and infrastructures, and water users, their locations, and their water use patterns. But I also use the rainfall runoff model to estimate the inflows of some ungaged river streams to estimate their flows and put that into the river system model. Then I developed a simplified flood inundation model that is mostly based on remote sensing topographic data to roughly estimate the riverine flood extent and flood depth. So these are the three models that I use. But again, within the river system model, there are also some rating curves at some locations in the river system model that translate the daily flows into river water levels. And then these river water levels were also used to calculate certain flood alarm thresholds that are used in Sudan, which I will show you in a bit. Yeah, so this is a general illustration for how a rating curve is used within the river system model. So that's the first part, which is used to estimate flood impacts. So at some locations, there are rating curves. This is just an illustration. It's not a real rating curve. And then at different locations, there are thresholds that determine the flood alarm level. So there is alert, critical, and flooding. These are used in Sudan. And then depending on the flow in the river system model and the water level, the number of days within each flood alarm category are calculated and evaluated. So that's the first part that I did in this evaluation, but there's also the flood inundation modeling part, which I will also show you some results for. This is a schematic for how the river system model looks like. I'm not going to talk about this, but it's quite detailed. What's important here as well is it includes nearly around 250 operating rules that represents with a good level of detail the operating rules of the daily rules of operating the river system. So I tested two scenarios. So of course, a baseline in which the GERD is not in the system. That's how the system is has been running, and so that's the first scenario. No GERD, and then I added the GERD to the system to be able to test that, to look at that impact of GERD, and then these two scenarios. And then when the GERD was in the system here, I'm looking at the long-term operation. So that's after the reservoir has been filled. I assume that the GERD is going to be operated to achieve a 90% power reliability, and that is done by targeting around 40 gigawatt hour per day based on a publication by Kevin and others. Then these two scenarios have been examined across 34 river flow sequences to look at hydrologic variability. Each one of the sequences is 34-year long. These sequences were developed using the index sequential method. So overall, there are 68 simulations. Let's look at some results. So these box plots here, they show the impact of GERD on number of flood alarm days at different locations. So if you look horizontally, you will be looking at the flood alarm level. So here horizontally, this is alert level at 3 locations: at Dame, Khartoum, and Dungula. And then here are the critical days and the flooding days. If you look vertically, you will be looking at specific locations. So this is Khartoum, Dungula, and Dame. What we can see here overall is that the GERD is going to reduce the number of alarm days within each of the 3 flood alarm categories. But what I want to highlight here as well, I think this is also takes us in the direction of what Kevin just mentioned. So when we look at at Khartoum gauge, for example, number of flooding days, we can see that they decline quite significantly, but they don't disappear. That means we'll still have some years with some flooding days, with some days that exceed that flooding threshold. And again, I also want to mention here is that the scenario with GERD actually assumes cooperation in the form of data sharing. So and that's translated in the model as instant downstream knowledge of how much water is released from GERD, so that the first level of coordination of upstream and downstream along that continuum of cooperation. So the reason why there still remain some flooding days is because the Blue Nile is highly variable. So this is these plots that you see on the right-hand side here, these are for one of the 34 simulated river flow sequences. And you can see that due to the high variability of the Blue Nile, the GERD will sometimes be at high levels, sometimes at low levels during droughts and so on. But when the GERD is at high level, there's a higher risk of too high downstream water releases. And these, you can see them here as red spikes here in terms of outflow. And that is when the GERD is high and there is high inflow coming in. So there's still, it's very important to note that the flood risk will still be there. It will just be significantly reduced. Now, if we look at that in a spatial way and look at using the flood inundation model, so this is the flooded area within Khartoum state, which is normally gets affected quite significantly with floods in Sudan. And here, these plots show a hydrologic condition similar to 1988, in which high floods occurred in Sudan. And we can see that when the GERD starts the hydrologic year at a low level, it will reduce the flood inundation within Khartoum state by nearly 70%, which is a very, very positive thing. But when it starts the year at a high level, that means it doesn't have that high storage to absorb that high inflow, then the decline in flood inundation area drops to only 10%, which is almost the baseline values. I also want to mention that, yes, mitigating floods is all good and is positive because it reduces damage and losses to lives and properties, but it also results in a loss of recession agriculture, and it leaves environmental impacts because it implies significant changes to the natural pattern of river flows. So in conclusion, operating the GERD to achieve a 90% power reliability is expected to reduce the flood hazard in Sudan. And we have seen that in terms of reduced number of flooding days. But again, there is a need to mitigate the remaining flood hazard by seasonal coordination and planning on GERD operation. And that involves looking at flow forecasts, data exchange with Sudan, exchanging of seasonal dam operation plans, because that, for example, if there are high flows expected, then Sudan could gradually draw down some of its reservoirs to be able to absorb that and reduce the flood hazard. But there's also a need to raise the public awareness on the remaining riverine flood hazard, because it's not going to completely disappear. And if they are not aware of that, they will actually start using the floodplains, and that will increase their vulnerability to floods. So it's very important to reduce that vulnerability in order to reduce the overall flood risk. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mohammed. That was an excellent presentation. And I encourage anybody to see his previous presentation from a couple of days ago as well, that really focused on the question of the GERD filling. And this was distinctly different, as it focused much more on the flood management and the impacts on flooding in Sudan. Okay, I'm going to bring on to the next presentation. I'm going to share my screen really quick while I introduce them. Okay, our next presenters here. So two together. So Engineer Zareb Bakr and Marwan Ali, they are both at the Cologne University of Applied Sciences. Zareb his research focused on planning and modeling integrated water and land systems to find sustainable solutions to the challenges facing water and food security. He's worked on several water-related research projects in the Nile, Middle East, Latin America, coordinates or co-authored several publications as well. He has a Master of Science of Integrated Water Resource Management from Cologne University of Applied Science, and his Bachelor from Civil Engineering from University of Khartoum. Marwan is a civil engineer with a research interests in river basin management at the Water and Energy Food Nexus and Sociohydrology. He's currently an early stage researcher at the Institute of Geography, Faculty of Mathematics, Natural Sciences at the University of Cologne. And he also has his master's from Cologne as well in the University of Applied Sciences, TH Cologne. Zarab and Marwan, if you want to take control of the screen, you can present your work, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My colleague Marwan here also is available to answer some question later in case they are there. Just to have a short background, the demand for water energy is increasing in the Nile Basin country, and the main driver of that is population growth and economic development in many Nile countries nowadays. There are many studies have been conducted to understand the water system for the Nile using simulation model. However, Takasi Adbara Basin is understudied. So let us have a short background about the study area. To understand the system, the basin is located in the north east part of Africa within the Nile Basin, with approximately of total area of 232,000 square meter and shared mainly between Ethiopia and Sudan, with a small part located in Eritrea. The average annual flow of Takasi Adbara River is around 12,500 million cubic meter, which account approximately for 15% of the annual flow of the Nile measured as Aswan. Also, the river is characterized by seasonal variation of and massive sediment load during the flood period between July and October, with half of the average annual flow occurred in August, as is shown here in this graph. The basin has 3 existing dams. The first dam is Takasi 5 Dam in Ethiopia, which is commissioned in 2009 with installed capacity of 300 megawatt. And our Adbara Citate complex dam in Sudan, and which started operating in 2015 with installed capacity of 320 megawatt to generate electricity and provide water for planned irrigation scheme of Upper Adbara. Then we have the oldest dam in the basin, Khashmagirba Dam, which was built in 1964 to provide irrigation water to New Halfa and water supply to New Halfa town. So we are trying to address the question of this webinar on how necessary is the coordination in the Nile and how realistic is the coordination of the Nile in the Nile by assessing the impact of reservoir operation on small scale irrigation expansion along the Takasi Adbara rivers, as well as assessing the impact of upstream water development on water energy nexus. How we assess that? In this study, a daily river basin model is developed using Riverware model, calibrated and validated for Takasi Adbara between 1983 and 2018 to include river flow, irrigation and domestic water demands, and hydropower storage dams. Also, a GIS-based model is developed using remote sensing land cover data from FABA to extract the irrigated agriculture along the riverine. Out of this model, several water energy indicators were assessed, such as water energy productivity, which introduced by Bashir and Al-Agib in 2018 to analyze the water footprint of hydropower generation by accounting for reservoir evaporation loss. Other water energy indicators also were assessed, such as coefficient of variation in daily energy generation, water supply shortage in both countries. So how did the dam regulated river affect the downstream agriculture system? Let's go back a little bit. After the commission of Takasi Dam in 2009, which created a reservoir of 70 kilometers long over time, average flow of 93 meter cubic per second has been released from the reservoir. This increases the reliability of the flow downstream the dam, which with an average of 11.2 billion cubic meter per year compared to 7.6 billion cubic meter per year before the commission of the dam, as shown here in the figure. So the result of land cover analysis revealed that the regulated flow over the year from Takasi 5 enabled expansion of small-scale irrigation along the river Rhine in both countries, Ethiopia and Sudan, as shown in this figure. For example, between 2009 and 2018, the area used for small irrigation is in Ethiopia increased by 425 hectares, and in Sudan by 3,711 hectares. However, compared to Sudanese irrigation potential, the potential in Ethiopian part is in the basin is relatively limited. Let's keep this information for later. Here in those maps, we show the areas upstream and downstream Khashmal Girba dams where those small-scale irrigation expansions took place after 2009. Here also we assess the impact of the current operation policy of Khashmal Girba and Takasi Dam on water energy productivity. Due to short time span since the operation of our Alpara Citate complex dam, it was excluded from this analysis. However, as we see here in figure 6A here, the operation of before the operation of Takasi 5 dam in 2009, Khashmal Girba dam generates relatively low hydropower, mainly during the wet season, compared to after 2009, after the commission of Takasi dam, as it started generating hydropower throughout the year, except when the reservoir is flushed in August. So after that, we assess the water energy productivity for both dam by dividing the total energy, the annual energy by the evaporation loss of from that reservoir. So here, coming to the figure to the right side, figure 7A, the water energy productivity of Khashmal Girba shows high year-to-year variability during the period between 1983 and 2018, as shown here. The results also show that there is a reduction in the mean annual water energy productivity after 2000 compared to before the commission of Takasi 5 dam. Coming to Takasi 5 dam, we notice that we can see that the annual hydropower generation as well as the water energy productivity of that dam is relatively high. Yes, sure. Yeah. Also, we assess the variability of daily energy generation in Takasi 5 and Khashmal Girba, and we see that there is high variation in daily energy from Khashmal Girba, which is created after 2009 compared to Takasi 5 dam. Finally, we assess the time series. We assess the regime shift in the time series of both dams to see where is the year that has significant change in the time series, and we can see that, for example, for the water energy productivity from Khashmal Girba has been reduced. However, there is no change. There is no change in the regime has been noticed in Takasi dam. So to conclude, upstream dam operation has been the main driver of rapid expansion of small-scale irrigation downstream. Even though we didn't analyze in detail the causality of this relationship, based on our analysis and the extensive field work done by Anis et al. In 2018, it's clear that this is the main reason behind this expansion. The analysis also reveals that the commission of Takasi 5 in 2009 resulted in significant shift in the annual generation on water productivity of Sudan. Finally, also the transboundary river basin benefits during the state co also are noticeable despite the dry periods and two dams filling. This brings us to the point that Sudan has more potential for more irrigation expansion in terms of land availability and suitability compared to Ethiopia. This could be a potential for cooperation and resource benefit sharing. So out of this study, we recommend the following: the selection of optimum operation policy of any dam in the basin should not solely depend on its water energy productivity. However, it should be rather about where where water energy productivity can be produced at a larger scale in another place. Also, the coordination between upstream and downstream dams is essential for maximum utilization of water and land resources in the basin, and resource sharing between riparian countries, even if dams unilateral operation could lead to some benefits. And finally, there should be an involvement of all stakeholders which is vital to achieve successful coordination of dams in the Nile Basin and optimize allocation decision of on a basin-wide level. Thank you so much, and yeah, we will keep it for now.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Zareb. I really appreciate that, and thank you to Marwan too, who I know contributed to that as well. It's always difficult fitting in a lot of information into a short period of time. We're going to move on. Our next speaker is a good friend and colleague, Mansour Mordos. We haven't been able to connect, but Mansour, can you hear us right now? Your mute is still on, so if you could take your mute off. Oh, excellent. Good.
Hello. Good afternoon, Dr. Kenan.
Let me welcome
everybody.
Mansour here. So Mansour, he's the director of water management director for the Merowe Dam. So this is the largest dam in Sudan. He's a civil engineer specialized in hydrology and water resource engineering, vast experience in hydromet networks, implementation, operation, maintenance of them. He's engaged in many research studies for optimal operation of the dam that he works at. He participated in studies that gained an extra $195 million per year of revenues that wasn't envisioned in the normal proposal. So Mansour has a lot of practical experience on managing and operating dams. So whenever I have questions on how dams really work, I go to Mansour to help answer my questions. So I want to pass to Mansour, and hopefully your presentation will work. And very good pleasure. And he's calling in from the northern area of Sudan right now. Can you share your screen now?
Yeah.
You can start sharing. If not, we can present it from our side. Did you have a challenge?
Can you see my screen right now?
Not yet.
We can't right now. We can do our backup plan, and you can speak, Mansour, and I'll put my screen on there with your presentation.
Yeah, you can do that.
And you just need to tell me when to go to the next slides.
Is it okay like this?
There
I
we
think
go.
it's
Now we're
coming.
starting. Okay, now you have it.
Okay. Yeah. Here we are. So thank you very much. And I would like to share with you my research on the Grand Human Renaissance Dam, the impacts on the hydrology of the Nile within Sudan. This is me, Mr. Mansour, from Merowe Dam. And change always come from very tiny things, not only from big things. And this is proven for all the history that the change always is coming. So constructing a dam will change the upstream and downstream hydrology, and this is inevitable and it's going to happen. So we have a research objective to quantify the potential change in flow rates and water levels and the annual runoff of the Blue Nile and also the main Nile. And the other research objective is to better estimate hydropower generation in both Roseres and Marawi Dam during the first filling of gear and also during the long-term operation. So all the impacts of the constructing a new dam, whether it's morphological impacts or environmental or ecological, is driven by a hydrological impact. So hydrological impact is the driving factor for all these other impacts. So I studied the hydrological impacts. The study area is extend from the Grand Recipient Renaissance Dam down to Dongola, which is downstream of Marawi, within Sudan at the northern state. So I developed a model. It's a daily model using Reservoir software, and it lasts for horizon time for 30 years using Reservoir, as I said, and then calibrated and validated. And after that, I develop a scenario. Actually, there are three scenarios. The baseline scenario with the recent condition for the dam operation as it is right now. And this is from 1963 to 2010. These are historical data. And this is equivalent to 2017 to 2046. That I took the historical and extended to the future. And then the first filling scenario, I assume that it should happen between 2017 and 2022, which is 6 years. And then I used a stochastic model and the long-term operation scenario, which starts from 2023 to 2046. So the filling scenario was adopted during the study, starting in January 17, and then year by year. First year will be 3.3 billion cubic meter of retained water, and then the next year will be 11.4, and then 14.7 until I reach 2022. At that time, gear should be filled to the maximum operation level. So for the filling period, I use index sequential method. Thanks for Reservoir using multi-run management system, MRM. And I take the first run, this is run number 1, and then swap the data and so on until I make 30 runs and then take the result for the stochastic result. So this is the main assumption that gear is producing the frame generation that during the operation, during the months. So it's approximately about 14.6 or about 15,000 gigawatt per year. So the results, I took 6 key stations from a dam and downstream of Roseres and so on until Dongola, and I take the water level at these stations, and I have the characteristic of this station, have the stage discharge rating curve for all this station, and then I change from water level to discharge and to see the effect of the water level and the change also of the water level during the filling of gear and also during the long-term operation. For the baseline scenario, this is from a dam, for example, for 30 years, the water level of a dam and also the inflow, and also for Roseres, the outflow from Roseres and also the pool elevation for Roseres. And this for the baseline scenario. So approximately at Dongola, we have about 80 billion cubic meter. This is the average annual flow. And also at the dam, about 45 billion. So this is the average for the Blue Nile yield. For the baseline scenario also at Marawi, approximately 6,800 gigawatt per year, and at Roseres 1,700 gigawatt per year. This is for the average energy production. For the first filling scenario, find here the water level at the dam for the 6 years of the filling, and the out and the inflow at the dam also, and you see how the envelope is looking like. It's stochastic analysis, and you find wide range of the upper and maximum and the minimum, and also the average. And for the runoff, find here at the dam, minimum could happen. You find 13 or 14 billion cubic meter could happen, and also 64 if there is a wet year, or there's 6 successive wet year, this will happen like this. And if you have 6 successive dry years, then we will find about 14 billion cubic meter per year. This the runoff from the Blue Nile, and so also for the other stations that represent the Nile reaches for the Blue Nile, and the main Nile start here from Hassanab up to Dongola. This GERD, the proposed filling scenario. Here you see how Marawi Reservoir is looking like, and also the pool elevation of Roseres also. Many years could Roseres Reservoir could not be filled if we stick to the same operation policy that we are applying right now. So this is an indicator for the operation rules should be changed, maybe change drastically or maybe change slightly, especially for the starting of the river. So when we zoom to see, for example, 1 year, this attenuation happen for the inflow from a dam. This an average year, and we find here how there's attenuation for the peak is coming, and also there is a lag time for the peak is happen maybe some 1 or 2 weeks later after the natural peak normally happen. And also for the operation,
you have
with
2 minutes.
Okay. And also we see here how we need to shift the starting of the filling of Roseres a little bit within 1 week or something like that, or 10 days, in order to make sure that Roseres Reservoir is filling. Also, we can see some other examples. Okay, this for the first filling also, and for the long term scenario, this the result from a dam, and for the long term scenario also for the daily releases from Roseres. There's no any change will happen during the first filling. The effect will be mainly at July. So maybe 86% of the flow at Khartoum will be less than the normal. And also from July to September, there is a big impact during the filling time, and also in water level there will be a drop up to up to 3 meters less than the peak, 2 to 3 meters. And regarding also during the filling for the 6 years, there will be also drop in energy. For the long term, there will be increase by 7 times of the flow during the low season, and will be about 80% more, and also in El Kuru, and 70% more in Dungula. But for the months July to October, there will be less water, and also might be down to 60% or 50% less than the normal. And at November, December also will be increased. But in total, there's no any change. It will be only 2% or 4% from the normal.
Mansour, can you jump towards the end pretty quick? We need to wrap it up here pretty quick.
Okay. So the impact of GERD, which will be only temporal impact, but there's no any impact in the magnitude. And the recommendation is to perform a comprehensive study for further investigation, and to provide the recent operation rules and policies of Sudan dams and water system, and develop new one, and also to special attention for the drawn from the method of Sudan released, especially during the first filling, and finally to close observation on monitoring of river water level and discharge during the filling stage. And also for the long-term operations, there should be a defined agreed for better managing and planning of blue water water resources. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mansour. That's a great contributions, and I worked with Mansour for several years, and he does bring a very reasonable, rational voice to how water is actually being managed, and really the implications of the upstream development is felt in his day-to-day operations. So I know there's benefits and there's risks, and Mansour is someone who can really explain those well. We'll go on to our next speaker now. Let me show my screen really quick. Mansour, if you can end the sharing of your screen, please. There we go. Okay, our next speaker is from Bahadar. It's Engineer Ephraim Abe Kiris. He's a lecturer and researcher from Bahadar. His research is focused on climate change and hydrological cycles, modeling and analysis of resources, particularly for agriculture. He has an MSc from Addis Ababa Institute of Technology at University of Addis Ababa, and his bachelor's is from Bahadar University. And he'll be speaking today on the implications of the Ethiopian dam downstream. So please, Engineer Ephraim.
Okay, can I share it?
Yeah, let me. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, may I start?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and good afternoon. Thanks, Mr. Kawan. So now I'm presented on the long-term potential impact of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the downstream High Aswan Dam. So as a background of these outcomes, water resource in the Nile Basin actually, which is not fully developed, and also it's not optimally allocated for the riparian countries. So from this 85% of the Nile flow, which can be reached on Egypt, will be arise from Ethiopia. So this 60% will be on the upper Blue Nile up-by. But when it comes to on this contribution, Ethiopia will have the capacity to irrigate less than 5% of potential area. But this Nile basin, especially the upper Blue Nile up-by, it has a capacity to produce 6,000 megawatt hydropower. But unfortunately, Ethiopia will develop less than 3% of the hydropowers. So as you see from the material and then the method, actually this is the GERD physical characteristics data. And from as an modeling, I am using the open water surface evaporation from High Aswan Dam and the Great Renaissance Dam. So the red line indicates the hard High Aswan Dam evaporation loss monthly. And when you come to on the blue line, which is the GERD evaporation loss. So from this modeling aspect, I am using for 7 years of stream flow monthly data. Then according to the water use sectors, I am using the 959 agreement. So Egypt will take 55.5 billion cubic meter of water per annum. And also Sudan will take 8.5 billion cubic meter of water for irrigation uses. Then when you come to the physical characteristics of the existing dam structure and the planned, the ongoing dam structures. So the GERD has a capacity to produce 6,000 megawatt power, and the capacity of the live storage capacity will be the 59.2 billion cubic meter of water. So from this, I am using the ModSim simulation, reservoir simulation models. So for that, I'm using for 7 years of data, monthly stream flow data. And also the model is calibrated and validated. Then I've got it already, the R square will be safe. Then when it comes to the result of this finding, the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will produce around 40,750.4 gigawatt hours per annum as energy. But due to the construction of this GERD on the long term, it can be decreased the inflow rate by 3.957%. It can be reached on High Aswan Dam. Similarly, this GERD has an evaporation loss of 1.7 billion cubic meter of water per annum as open water surface evaporation. So from this evaporation loss, the maximum evaporation loss reached on the month of March, and the minimum will be on the rainy season on July. So as you see from these figures, the red line indicates the outflow after the construction of the GERD, and the blue line indicates the inflow of the natural river flows. So this figure also indicates the energy variation of HUD. So considering GERD and without GERD. So when you come to here, this blue line is the energy production capacity of GERD as monthly, and the red line indicates here the energy production capacity of HUD. But when you come to this green line, the light green line indicates the energy production capacity of HUD considering the upstream of GERD. So this indicates the energy production slightly affected due to the presence of GERD. So when it comes to the HUD simulation general results, the flow decreased by 2.755% already based on this upstream GERD. And the average reservoir levels will be decreased by 1.1 meter as an average, which indicates 0.609%. So as an average, it can be decreased by this percent in the long term. And the miracle will be that the open surface evaporation will be decreased by significantly by 9.92% annually. So the presence of GERD has an advantage to reduce the evaporation loss of the HUDs. And also the energy production slightly indicates by 5.43%. But in the good side, this presence of GERD has no impact on the energy water use abstraction both on the Sudan as well as the Egyptians. So this year, This is the hard inflows before GERD, and this one is hard inflow considering the upstream GERD, and this one is the GERD inflow and outflow at Manzili. And when you come to here, this is the evaporation loss of the two reservoirs with considering GERD and without considering the implementation of GERD. So this blue line indicates it is the loss, evaporation loss per annum will be occurred on the GERD, which is the seasonal variation. As you can see here, the month July to October is a minimum evaporation loss on GERD, and slightly it can be increased on March. So unconditionally, on this season, from the season July to September, the Egyptian, the high Aswan Dam the evaporation loss will be maximum. So when we implement this GERD, the energy production slightly increased by this. So this line, the green line, indicates the evaporation loss considering the upstream of GERD. So this means totally the energy will be, the evaporation loss will be declined 9.92% per annum. So this is also an indication of the reservoir water levels. So when we implement this GERD on the upstream side, the evaporation, the storage, the mean storage level of HUD will be declined into this. So slightly, which means less than 1.1 meter will be declined on the presence of the GERD. But in general, the limitation of this research will be the evaporation loss will be only considering for the open surface evaporation, and I can't considering the seepage through the body of the dam and through the reservoir, both on the HUD and the GERD, as well as the reach between the two dams, and also the open surface evaporation on the reach will not be calculated or will not be assumed. So, as a conclusion, in this paper, I have seen the potential impact of GERD on HUD in terms of power, the reservoir water levels, the irrigation water use, the inflow, and the evaporation losses. So according to these parameters, so the HUD evaporation loss will be decreased by 9.92%, which is an advantage of the positive impact of GERD on HUD, and the inflow which will be increased by 2.755%. So this inflow will be compensated on the evaporation losses of HUD. And finally, the energy production will be declined 5.43%, which is somehow compared to the reliability, which is insignificant amount. So generally, in general, the presence of this GERD has a positive impact on the Nile basins or the Nile riparian countries, which can be added more than 15,000 gigawatt hours per annum. So when we conclude on this finding, the GERD has a positive impact on the downstream country, especially Sudan, as well as the high Aswan Dam or Egypt. So there are many controversial ideas between the researchers and the government, but in general, when I have obtained the result here. So the presence of GERD has a positive impact. Maybe the energy will be declined.
We have 1 minute.
Okay, the energy will be declined in slight modes, but generally it has a positive impact, not only HUD, but for the reference. This is all about my presentation. Thank you, the moderators.
Thank you, Ephraim.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Really do appreciate it. We are a little bit behind time. So what we're going to do, we're going to do one more presentation. First, Hisham El Diari, he will speak next. And Ephraim, can you end your screen sharing, please?
Okay.
Okay, so Hisham is a researcher in sustainable solutions, to the challenges of facing water security across transboundary basins. To show this really quick here, he's done extensive publications as he's finishing his second PhD. I don't know who does two PhDs other than Hisham. So he's finishing his second PhD at University of Washington. He also has a PhD from University of Louisiana, as well as a master's degree. But he's published some really, really exceptional papers in the last couple of years. So I really encourage people to find that. We're very honored to have him calling in. Hisham, why don't you go ahead and take control, please?
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. And I'll be giving this short talk on the future operation of High-Aswan Dam, especially the challenges and the opportunities which are existing with the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So just to quick introduction of the High-Aswan Dam, I probably all of you know that it's the largest existing dam in the Nile River Basin, and it's operating primarily for to meet the demand in the downstream of the Nile, especially for the Nile Delta in Egypt, specifically for the irrigation and hydropower production. And it has a storage capacity of 162 kilometer cube, which is, if you think about it in terms of the GERD, it's about more than twice the storage capacity of the GERD. So some of the challenges which are existing for the operation of High-Aswan Dam, its location in a transboundary river, which, as you know, it's the Nile River is shared between 11 countries, and this makes the system very complicated to manage the water resources. Another challenge is existing of transboundary dams, which will come in the future, or the planned dams. And you can see here in this map, it's showing these red triangles, which indicate the dams planned for the future, and some of them are planned in Sudan, some of them are in Ethiopia, but also in the White Nile as well. Another challenge is the growing of the population, which will reflect also in increasing demand for the energy and the food. Both sectors also will have an increase in their demands. Another challenge in the basin, and also for the operation of High-Aswan Dam, is the availability of the data. And here's the challenge is a kind of two-dimension. It's data availability and also the data sharing, because even if the data is available, sometimes it's not shared between the Nile countries. The other challenge I want to share also, which is very important, is the climate variability. And as other presenters said, it's very important to know if the year is a wet year or a dry year, and based on that, we can decide how to operate the dams, especially for the downstream. So as I said, one of the big challenges is the existing of the data. And in my research, I tried to rely more on the satellite observations. And I developed this blueprint or framework, which is basically integrating different models and using satellite. As you can see here, there is a hydrologic model, there is a reservoir model to simulate the operation and filling of GERD or HAD, and another also satellite-based model is the ET or evapotranspiration model for the downstream. And in my research is that, for example, to estimate the evapotranspiration in the downstream for the Nile Delta, and use this as a proxy of how much water is being used for irrigation. So let's move to some of the opportunities which exist. And the first thing is actually if we can use a satellite observation with the hydrologic model to understand the operation of High-Aswan Dam. And in this paper, for example, we looked at if we can infer the operation of High-Aswan Dam just using satellite observation. So here, this figure is showing the blue line, which is the simulated or the model using satellite observations for the High-Aswan Dam releases for 5 years from 1998 to 2002, and compared to the measured discharge at the High-Aswan Dam. And we can see that the satellite observations are able to capture the operation in general. With some, there is some underestimation, especially in some of the months that are following the flooding season from September to November. But in general, the key result from this study is that the satellite-based modeling of High-Aswan Dam operation shows a good agreement with the measured discharge. A second opportunity is to adapt the High-Aswan Dam operation to the filling and operation of upstream dams, and in particular, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And I'm here showing, for example, the time it will take for the High-Aswan Dam to recover back from the reduction in the flow, which is expected during the filling of the GERD. So the x-axis here is showing the number of filling years for the GERD. The y-axis is showing the number of recovery years. So what I mean by recovery again is how long it will take for High-Aswan Dam to return back to its normal operation. And the two panels are showing using an adaptive approach versus not following any adaptive approach. So the left panel is without following an adaptive approach in the downstream in Egypt versus following an adaptive approach in the downstream. And the adaptive approach here I followed is that Egypt can put some restrictions on the irrigation for the downstream, and so making the system maybe more stressed, the water system more stressed in the downstream of High Aswan Dam. So the key result I want to show here is that as the number of filling years increase, the recovery year of High Aswan Dam will decrease. But this is actually more significant if we have a very short, if it's a very short filling year, then we expect that recoveries can go up. For example, here the average or the median is about 20 years for a 2-year of filling scenario. But if you consider also the climate variability, if it's a very dry year, the recoveries can go up to more than 40 years. If Egypt is following an adaptive approach with the right panel here, we can see that at more than 7 years of filling, the High Aswan Dam can recover back to its normal operation immediately right after 1 year of GERD operation. So the key here, I want to share that the filling scenario of more than 7 years will have less impacts on High Aswan Dam operation compared to fast filling scenarios. Another opportunity when to operate the High Aswan Dam is to benefit from the forecast information or the stream flow forecast to improve the High Aswan Dam operation. In this study, I used an available model called the North American Multimodal Ensembles, which provides a forecast for the temperature and precipitation at a monthly scale for 1 year lead time or 12-month lead time. So the figure here showing the potential forecast value for the High Aswan Dam, and as you can see, when the color bar is yellow, it means like there is a more potential for the forecast, or the forecast is useful for the High Aswan Dam operation. And what we found here is that the forecast, stream flow forecast will have more value, especially during the months following the flooding season from October to December. But during this month is in the beginning of the year, from January to July, there is less value for the forecast to the operation of High Aswan Dam. Also, another thing which is also important to indicate from this figure, the forecast horizon, or how long the forecast can be important for the operation of High Aswan Dam. And what we found is that the forecast horizon for High Aswan Dam is about 8 months. Beyond the 8 months, the forecast has no value to improve the operation of High Aswan Dam. So the key result here is that the forecast value added to the High Aswan Dam operation is more pronounced from October through December with 8-month forecast horizon. Another opportunity which exists also is to using this satellite information and forecast models to develop a user-ready decision support system. And in my work also, I developed this system, which is called the Nile Basin Reservoir Advisory System, or Nbdf. And this system is currently running every day, running the hydrologic model and also using satellite observation to monitor the reservoir.
Have 2 minutes. Sorry for interrupting you.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. So it's running now every day with the hydrologic model and satellite observations, and you can see you can go there and see how much of the inflow is coming to the High Aswan Dam, how much releases are going out of High Aswan Dam. There are other tools as well in this system. Some of them are still in progress, but one of them which is also very interesting is to monitor the reservoir filling of GERD. Also, again, using satellite, we can see how much of the GERD is being filled. The last opportunity I want to share is also the existing capabilities to promote the training and capacity building for stakeholder engagement. And for that, I organized this workshop last year to train the stakeholders from Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia about the remote sensing and different topics related to the remote sensing, as you can see here from this different range of topics. And it was a great opportunity to expose the stakeholders in the Nile River to this kind of research, especially with the satellite observations, hydrologic model, and reservoir operation. Last, and I think which is the most important, that is the path forward. And I believe that the path forward, we have to keep fostering the negotiation to turn this conflict we have into cooperation. The leaders, the ministers, they have to come together and trying to turn this conflict into cooperation. What I call like the C2C solution. I think this is what we should think about, and also we have to think about the coordination of the three countries together, so we have an efficient operation of the dams, and also we have a benefit for the three countries. I think I'll stop here, and yeah, if there is any questions, I will be happy to take, or you can even email me with any questions. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Hisham, and thank you for sticking within the time. I'm probably to blame for going over and pushing everything later, but we have one more presentation, but unfortunately one of our panelists, Dr. Yilmaz Salishi, will need to leave in 10 minutes. So what we want to do is get some questions going first for Dr. Yilmaz, and then we'll go back and have Yang present his last presentation, which shows a good comprehensive view. And then we can continue on for a little bit later than the planned time. So some of the key question that we started with in this was, what is it going to take, or what are the keys? How necessary is coordination and cooperation, and what are the obstacles to be able to get there? So obviously the role of Intro has been to promote coordination, to promote cooperation. We see many of the challenges in terms of obviously in terms of all of the question around future development, but there's also real questions just in terms of safety, as we see too. So I think we want to take this opportunity and ask Dr. Yilmaz, what is the perspective right now in terms of those different levels of cooperation, in terms of the safety, in terms of notification, and those type of things, and then in addition, sort of the longer questions of drought management. If you could reflect on that a little bit, please.
Sorry, just before Dr. Yilmaz starts, dear presenters, you have a lot of questions in the Q&A feature, so you can go through them and answer it directly, because we have limited time to go through all the questions later on. Dr. Yilmaz, sorry, you can proceed now.
All right, Azeb. Thank you, Kevin, and Intro for inviting me in this very interesting forum. It's a very, thoughtful presentation I've seen. That's really could give us some input into future Nile discussion and even the present one. Back to you, Kevin, regarding reservoir cooperation. For sure, what you present has many elements, necessary elements for Nile also, compared to Colorado situation. If I explain the way I see it, GERD issue now and Nile reservoir cooperation, there are two distinct elements we should observe as water resource engineers. Cooperation and coordination year-by-year basis, as you presented it. So I know the hydrology end of September in GERD and in many reservoirs in Nile, but in Lake Victoria, the hydrology is shifting a little bit different, but that is to our advantage. So once we know that, the flow into our reservoirs, especially the upper reservoirs, then we make a coordinated decision. So for example, if our brothers Sudan and Egypt need more water during drought period, which is a critical situation, then we can release them what they want. But if that release, for example, affects our hydropower generation to some extent, then Egypt can enter into supplying Ethiopia with their gas-generated turbines. So we can have, transaction mode of cooperation in coordinating these reservoirs. So this is year-by-year basis. And many details can be done in flood. When flood happens, it is not possible, as my brother said, 100% mitigate flood downstream, but significantly the flood will be reduced. But if, for example, one think about using GERD reservoir as flood storage, there will be substantial change in hydropower generation. Then if that is the need of the downstream, then compensation mechanism has to be, cooperation in that area has to be thought about. So we do not need to mix year-by-year operation, which is as stated in DOP, with long-term operation aspect. So the very challenging aspect now in the Nile, in the GERD negotiation, is the two downstream countries are requiring Ethiopia to release from GERD, let's say for the next 50 years, how much should be the release during drought, during average, during wet year. How could you manage this without water allocation prior to having water allocation among the three countries? So this is not possible. That's why we say no binding agreement for long-term operation. But year-by-year operation aspect, nearly the agreement is ready. Basically, the agreement is ready. It's minor tuning up. The three countries experts have done excellently on this aspect. I'm very proud of the three countries expert, and we are nearby that. So we make this distinction from our side. We know that more cooperation required from Ethiopian side because we are upstream countries, but the downstream countries also has something to give for upstream countries. We need to think clearly on this situation. So how we do this one? The second point, from what I see, the Nile Basin countries come to CFA framework, make water sharing agreement because we need it in the Nile Basin. It is not like, large rivers like Amazon, water is excess, you don't need to share, only you share benefit. It is not like that. Nile is a water scarce river. So unless you make arrangement on that, when Ethiopia starts to construct irrigation, the same problem starts, this high tension which we see now. That's not, it's not good for every country this to continue. So if water sharing arrangement, comprehensive water management arrangement is in place, then the Nile Basin Commission and Intro could be a platform to coordinate this operation aspect of reservoirs, or the three countries can do it. The TCC, which now in this discussion, can also come together. We can do the coordination aspect. It is it's also, there is economic aspect, transaction aspect is there, but the prerequisite in the Nile Basin is water allocation. Like as Kevin, you presented it for Colorado, because water is scarce, the water sharing, the amount Mexico gets, the amount USA gets, even the states there in US, how much they get is very critical. Then you build minutes over it every year, every 2 years to adjust to the situation. But when no water sharing agreement, I will see a very challenging time ahead to coordinate reservoirs. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yilma, for that. We appreciate that. And so, I mean, before you go, maybe one follow-up question to that. What is the role of what do you see the role of NBI being in terms of coordination between in terms of the shorter term coordination even? Would NBI ever have a role in terms of that information sharing, or is that just directly between the countries? What is the role of NBI in that in the sort of the critical management?
You see, the countries, if they choose the path of annual based operation, let's do it this way, then go comprehensive agreement in the future, then we trust each other very well in this aspect. Once we agree, no problem. We don't have any problem to share data. It is just conceptually we need to agree what to do about the future release. I mean, the release from Blue Nile after 150 years and so on. If that is clear, then I think on agreement basis, the three countries can do it. But, you know, for institutional aspects, we already built NBI and intro for long time. They could be, once the agreement reached, they could join the process. The three countries represented in intro is like regional office, then we can proceed in that. But prior to that, there should be clear agreement on what to do with future development upstream of GERD, and you know, some of the details. And I will see intro and the future Nile Basin Commission a very important role. I will see that.
Well, we know you have to. We know you have to go, because I believe you're giving another talk at seen in Italy soon later on today, if I recall.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you being able to take the time to join, and I apologize for this being and moving so late. We do have one other presenter we would like to present, and then we'll go back to panel session. Thank you very much, Dr. Yilma, and
thank you
for joining us here. If you can't stay longer, feel free, but we understand if you have to depart. Okay, so Dr. Yang is he's a postdoctoral researcher at Milan, at Technical University in Milan. Let's see here. Let me share my screen really quick. So postdoctoral researcher in Milan, Italy, previously held posts at Georgia Institute of Technology, as well as with Dr. Paul Block at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And he's been doing some very, very interesting work, a very interesting paper that's out right now in that's able for people to review online in Hess on potential coordinated operations, particularly reflecting the inflows into the Ethiopian dam. So Dr. Yang, if you could please take the screen.
Yep, sure. Let me see.
He's calling in from China too, so we are very global in our meeting today.
Huh. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. So my topic is the water sharing policies condition on hydrologic variabilities to inform reservoir operations. And apparently, the reservoir informed, it referred to the Grand Ethiopian River System. Most work has been finished in the University of Wisconsin-Madison, although I'm working in the Polytechnic de Minan. So as we know, the GERD is primarily designed for hydropower generation, and also it will significantly alter the natural flow region, and also it will lead to very significant hydraulic and political conflicts between the three countries, especially because it's very large enough, right? And also because of great installed capacity, and also because the majority of the Nile River stream flow came from the Blue Nile, especially in rainy seasons. So why I'm talking about the water sharing here instead of the benefit sharing based on the cooperative operations, just the most presenters tells us. So the reasons why is very difficult for us to achieve a mutually agreed upon cooperative strategies, because there's various preference by different stakeholders, right? And another thing is that there's no standard that regulate how to allocate or share the benefits from the coordination, right? And also there's no basin-wide authority currently to enforce the allocations, even though Nile Basin Initiative could serve in this role, but that depends. So this way, I'm talking about the figure out the problem, the water use conflicts between the downstream, upstream countries from perspective of trade-off between power generation and drought risk. I'm not saying that the correlative operation is not important, but I've just provide another angle to this problem here. So, yeah. So before talking about the conflict, what is conflicts? We need to figure out the trade-offs, right? The trade-off between the benefits in downstream upstream countries. Here, after optimization on the grid reservoir operation rules, we can figure out that there's a clear trade-off between the main output, the hydropower generation, and the variability of the downstream flow variations. We can take very clear in this figure that there's a clear trade-off between the variabilities of the reservoir storage and annual release. What does it mean? It means that the variability of hydraulic variability can be burdened or can be buffered by the reservoir or can be transferred to downstream. So there's a trade-off between the variabilities. So, and that's why we can do some discussions, and we need to better balance the trade-off between the two factors. So even though we can find a point here in the Python front, find the solution here. So the problem is how to translate the solution to the policy, the drought mitigation policy. Here is what I'm doing here. Yep. In the normal reservoir operation, we just need to reservoir storage, inflow, and season information, because if we have more water available, we can release more. So it's straightforward. But after the drought mitigation or water sharing policy, as this 9 shows, if sometimes we have the dry years, in these dry years, we hope to release more water than the natural inflow, right? But in the dry years, we can release less than expected. So this 1.119 shows the difference, the relationship between the reservoir inflow and reservoir release here. So what I've been doing here is we can optimize the reservoir operating rules, and we can get the reservoir inflow and release the relationship. And by using that relationship, we can get a drought mitigation policy to limit the minimum annual water release for the grid reservoir operation. So that's this idea of the water sharing or drought-focused water sharing here. So specifically, what I'm doing here is, sorry, maybe I can get a pointer here. Yes. Firstly, we can optimize the reservoir operating rules, just like we mentioned here, and then we can get the trade-off between the downstream and upstream benefits. And after that, after the feasible solution selection, I will mention it later, but after we determine one point in the Python front, we can get a relationship between the reservoir inflow and release. And based on that, we can figure out some lines as the constraint for the water sharing policy here. And then after that, we can comparing the 3 conditions: no water sharing, and the traditional water sharing, and our proposed water sharing in terms of reservoir operation and drought mitigation performance. So this policy development is interpretable because it's a linear regression. By using linear regression, it's very straightforward, and also it's very flexible because we can adjust our preferences by choosing different points or solutions in our Python front, and also we can choose different exceedance level, because here we can see there are multiple lines. Even with the same slope, we can adjust the intercept continuously. So in this way, is interpretable and flexible. Also is drought focused because we can release more water in the dry seasons. So. And also here is how the solution selected, or because we have so many points in the Python front, which one should we choose to derive the drought policy? Here, after get the solutions, we can compare the statistical distribution between these of the release and inflow. In this figure, we can see that for the 10th percentile of the inflow outflow, we can see in this condition the release is higher. In dry season is higher than inflow. So to some degree, the drought conditions are mitigated, but we can do more. For example, we can decrease the power duration gradually, and then we can get a better result in the drought mitigation. But there's a trade-off there, right? And also after the drought policy selection, we can get the corresponding policies by using a relationship between the reservoir inflow and the water release. Take this as an example. We can see that in the original points, some points is below this line. So that's why the drought policy is derived, right? And the colorful point, the green point shows the solutions after drought mitigation. So this very close, but more importantly, the colorful we can ensure all the colorful points above this line, which means we can ensure, for example, in this year, in a dry year, we can ensure all the street water release will be higher than 40 billion cubic meters. It's really high value for the GERD release, right? And after that, we can comparing the result of the original and the drought mitigation policy. So it's a comparison between the with and without drought mitigation. The green line shows original one, and the colorful line is others. And the green one shows that the drought mitigation rules will be inferior to original rules. We can see for different power generation levels, we can get very limited conditions with the drought mitigation inferior to original rules, which means we can get more power generation by using the drought mitigation. And also we can see the relationship between the drought policy slope and the water and the power output. So we can see with the higher power generation, we can get the steeper slope here, line here. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And also,
please mute your microphones if you're not the speaker. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we can also find the different comparison in the multi-objective optimization with and without drought mitigation. This line, as the blue line shows, is the part front without drought mitigation. So clearly, there's a trade-off, right? But after the green line shows the multi-objective optimization results with the drought policy, it's very clear that we can get better results, especially for the in terms of mean output. So we can see the re-optimized rules produce slightly more power generation on regional rules, even though they can produce very similar distributions of water release. So this is very important, which means we didn't increase the risk of drought, but we can slightly increase the power generation. So that's why the drought mitigation policies here is important and useful, effective here. And also we can do the comparison with the flexible and static drought policies. The static policies shows here is the horizon line here. We can just use the horizon line, which means we can flexible. We just release the certain amount of water, guarantee a certain amount of water every year to the downstream countries. So this kind of the static rules. We compare these two types of the drought mitigation policies in terms of the annual water release distributions and power generations, and we can see more power generation can be generated with the same release distributions as the first part one, the policy type 1 shows, and also we can produce higher drought release with the same power output. So which means we can get better results. And the reason is that static policy transfer the risk of the water shortages, majority of the risk to the GERD, which will limit the capacity of the power generation for the GERD, and this will in turn to affect the performance and drought mitigation, because the GERD will prefer high power generation, right? So this in turn will affect the annual water release.
One minute.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so that summary here, we can find that there's a very clear trade-off between the reservoir storage and release variabilities, and this can be used to facilitate the water sharing discussions, because if we have low trade-off, we have low base or have low information to discuss the conflicts, right? And also, the characteristics of water sharing policies can be related to the trade-off, because we can see that there's the slope of the water sharing policy is highly correlated with power generation, highly correlated with power front, the position of power plant in the multi-objective organization, right? And also, effective policies are available to balance this trade-off, even considering drought periods, at least comparing with the reservoir operation without water sharing, and also with the operation with the traditional or static water sharing policy. So that's it. Yeah, and thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ron, for that good presentation. And I know it's always a challenge to how do you bring in notions of optimization in a system that's highly not optimal. It's a big challenge that I face with my own research as well. That's all our presentations. We are over time, but we do want, if the panelists are willing to stay with us, we would really like to get feedback from our two remaining panelists. And again, we have, if you can stop sharing your screen, please. Our two panelists that remain with us today is Dr. Salah, Director of Intro, and Dr. Terry Fulp, as I introduced earlier, as the former regional director in the Colorado River. I know we're going to start out with Dr. Fulp, and he prepared a couple things to say, sort of reflecting on his experiences in the Colorado River. But he will then we'll continue to engage with our questions about, well, what are the real obstacles, or what are the possible roles that Intro could play, and we'll direct that towards Dr. Salah after Terry has an opportunity to share some of his thoughts and experiences. So, Dr. Fulp, please share your thoughts with us.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I very much appreciate being a panelist here, and very good presentations. I just want to verbally, without slides, just hit on a couple of three themes that I think are extremely important to move yourselves along that continuum toward collaboration. The first one, I think everyone here, I believe, believes in this, and that is that you have to have sound, very good technical information. That's the foundation, it's the basis, and it has to be shared in an honest and transparent manner. If you have that, and we have really shown that, particularly with our partners in Mexico, you then help build that trust that has been so talked about here. I think the second thing that I'd like to add is, much like the collaboration continuum, if you think of the big overall problem that you're trying to solve, or problems, it's over there on the far right-hand side in a similar manner. To jump over there and solve all those problems at once is nearly impossible, and probably is impossible. Certainly it was on the Colorado. And so what you have to do is you have to take incremental steps, just like, again, with collaboration. Incremental steps, picking off pieces and solving them. The experience with Mexico that was talked about with these minutes, that's essentially what happens. With Mexico, we are all the way on the right-hand side with collaboration. They are truly our partners. And we got there again by solving problems in an incremental fashion. Often we solve those problems just for a period of time. Our first big solution with Mexico that was mentioned was for a 5-year duration. We really wanted it to be for a 15 to 20-year duration, but we said 5. We gained great experience with that, and then we're able to move forward again. And then the last thing I would say, maybe this is one of the hardest, and that is the value of having personal relationships. It's really difficult when as I call it, the chips are down and you're trying to get to some negotiated solution if you don't know the person across the table from you. And that takes time and a lot of energy, but it's extremely important. And in the end, I think it again really gets you to that place you want to be, a full collaboration. So those are the three things, Kevin, and everyone, I wanted to share. And I know for the interest of time, I'll just go back on mute and wait for the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry, for that. Yeah, Terry brings in a wealth of experience in actually bringing people together. And I think one of the things that I've learned from him is the importance of the process. You can't solve everything at once, but you can build a process to take pieces off at a time, solve one thing at a time and the next thing at a time. You may not be able to get everything, the chances of solving everything to the end for the next 1,000 years is non-existent. You're not going to solve that. But there's things that can be done now that could help into the future. So what I would love to do next is to get the feedback from Dr. Saleh, who has had such a prominent role in the Nile Basin for a long time and really understands the challenges and the role of Entro now. So if the question would really go to him as to what are the major obstacles right now, and how do you feel like they can be overcome in our current context in the Nile, and what is really what is the role of Entro in this in the short term as well as the long term? So Dr. Saleh, if you could reflect on that.
I just want to add one point there. For Dr. Saleh, he has been involved as one of the negotiation team. So he will really give us an insight what Entro can do as a regional organization to help this kind of negotiation and coming to a real cooperation to the basin. Dr. Saleh, you may continue.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kevin. I must say that I really enjoyed all these presentations, the keynote presentations, they display the international experience. They are all very, very, very informative. My comment will go to why the coordination is not up to the level that we need. Now we are almost 20 years Nile Basin Initiative. First, we have to say that dams touch almost all socioeconomic activities, either positively or negatively. If you came to the development of irrigation, hydropower, and so on, navigation, that is positive. But if you go to the impact on ecosystems, fisheries, and so on, to some extent it is negative. But at the end, as I said in my welcoming address, dams, they have this challenge, technical challenges, but at the end, they have their political dimension, which is very, very influential, especially in the Eastern Nile sub-basin. So at the end, if we want to, we know that from all the experience studies, cooperation needs to be, it needs harmonized policies, needs some legal framework, it needs some institutional, and all this is to be assisted by technical. But up to now, despite all the efforts, technical efforts that we are now doing through implementation of different projects, I say these are just facilitating or enhancing the cooperation. That is our goal. Despite of all this, cooperation is not up to the level that we need. Because as I said, reservoirs, they have very political. So at the end, it is a political decision. I can say that the political will, although it is the people they are talking about it very much, but it is not that is up to the people to take. Why this political will is not is not there to take effective action towards cooperation or coordination in general. Despite of all I said, we demonstrated by technical studies, projects, international experience, and so on, but still cooperation is not because the political will is not there. From my studies or from my going through the literature international experience, I find there is reasons offered by Supermanian and Bridget Brown and Wolf, that is in a paper entitled Understanding and Overcoming Risk to Cooperation Along Transboundary Rivers. This paper was published in 2014 in Water Policy. What they said? They said there is a perceived risk in the hands, in the minds of politicians and decision makers. What are those perceived risks? They gave 3. Cooperation will expose the country to harm. 1, cooperation will jeopardize something of value to the country. And the 3rd one, cooperation will threaten the political future of the individual policy or decision makers. These are 3. I find both the first one, that is exposing the country to harm, and jeopardize something of value to the country, both these 2 are strongly linked to the very important point. It is touched by many presenters. And Dr. Yolma also touched it. And also the last, Dr. Young. It is about the benefit sharing. We know that the Nile Basin is based on benefit sharing. Dr. Young talked about water sharing a lot. I hope that we will hear from him in another presentation, maybe about benefit sharing, just to widen the scope of his presentation. What about this? We are talking about benefit sharing, but for the politicians and decision makers, what are those benefits quantitatively? Not to say just hydropower will increase, irrigation increase. What quantitatively, and how those benefits are shared. They are very, very. I can just say that Dr. Young talked about. He gave a procedure on how to share the water sharing, but it is very, very few. In literature, you find a procedure how benefits are benefit. This is a very, very complex way. We have talked about, for example, you find it in between Brazil and Paraguay. You find it in Senegal River. There is experience, but any basin it has its unique way to develop. It is how to share the benefits. Politicians and decision makers will not go into signing without this to be very, very clear to them. This is from my experience. They need to know how those benefits are shared. Otherwise, this risk of country to harm or losing something of value to the country will be in their mind. I hope that we will have more and more researches and studies on how benefits are shared, coming up with approaches, how benefits are shared in the Nile Basin, Nile Basin in general, and the Eastern Nile in particular. So this is very important point. We need to tackle it so that at the end, those politicians and decision makers who are going to take the decision and to go into coordination or coordination or cooperation. So these risks need to be addressed. Maybe we need some risk reduction strategy plan for different riparian countries that is to be based on recognition of rights, assessment of risk, taking into account core values of equity, efficiency, participatory decision-making, sustainability, and accounting. All those values should be taken. Once we solve this problem, I think the way will be very clear for institutionalized coordination or cooperation, that the way will be ready or paved for legal, for institutional, and already the technical is already going on. I think that is my last point. Hopefully I have covered some points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saleh. I think that notion on political will is a very, very key piece. Azed, do you want to continue on, or I can ask one of the questions here?
I think both of them gave us a good insight, and one thing which was missing, I think, is why is data sharing still such a challenge for Nile Basin? Maybe Dr. Saleh can address that one, since we lost Dr. Ilma. Dr. Saleh, can you touch upon that? Because data sharing plays a bigger role in forecasting and getting inflow to the reservoir, which help to downstream countries. And why is data sharing agreement is not in place for Nile Basin country? And what's the challenge behind that? Dr. Saleh.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think data sharing is a prerequisite for any cooperation in river basins. That is otherwise they will, even this, when I am talking about this risk, perceived risk, one of the ways to address the is through data sharing and information and knowledge. That is very important. That knowledge should not be kept at the technical level, should be also known to all decision makers and policy makers. That is, it is very important. I see that in the Nile Basin we have cut a long way in data sharing. They have already approved the data sharing protocol, but still there is some skepticism. Say some countries are still. They have this perceived risk. I am talking here for Sudan, we don't have. I can say that almost over 80% of the data now moving in the Nile Basin is shared by Sudan. We believe that at the end, the Nile Basin should cooperate. They cannot live together without cooperation. We know the challenges, we know the limited or the scarce water resources, that this amount of water can only be optimized if we cooperate. That is belief of Sudan, at least. And because of that, we share our data. We know that if you go to the database of the DSS, it is almost of Sudan. we don't have any problem. But it's still, I can say that some countries still, they have this, because at the end, to share the data, you need to have the decision maker to say, okay, you give him why in technical base, but at the end, it is decision makers who will say, at the political level, they say, okay, sharing. So I think generally we don't have this problem with data sharing. We have, I think in the Nile Basin, we have come a long way. No problem with that. For example, in the flood between Ethiopia and Sudan, we don't have problem. It is daily, it's shared on daily basis for the Nile, Blue Nile, up to, we don't have any problem with that. I think this effort is progressing well, but we need the process of cooperation in general. As I said in my welcome, we need this cooperation and coordination of Nile of Reservoir to be comprehensive, not only just coordinating operation, but also to jointly own them and to plan, construct, and to share the benefit. That is our ambitious to reach. And I think all we are doing as the Nile Basin is just, we are demonstrating the benefits to decision makers so that they can go forward to the cooperation. Thank you.
I want to go back to that question of political will, I think, and direct a question more towards Dr. Fulp about the notion of political will. Obviously was something that took time. Why didn't this happen sooner? What happened with U.S. and Mexico, it was obviously building over time. And what was it that made the situation really start to change in 2000? And what would have happened if those steps didn't get taken? Can you speculate on that?
I think a bit. Let me share what happened. We had lined a very large canal to prevent seepage, for water conservation purposes, that runs right along the border with Mexico. And it's in the US, but the lining of that canal, of course, affected the near surface groundwater in Mexico. And so we had a very rocky relationship at that point. They didn't like that and understandably, we had not coordinated really well with them. We did have the legal right to do it, but it really hurt the relationship. Let me say it that way. We didn't have a real strong relationship on that continuum of collaboration. We were somewhere over there we shared data, but we weren't too far to the right. Then what happened? And this is, I think, addresses the idea of political will at very high levels in the United States and Mexican governments. It was the Secretary of the Interior in the United States. It was the ambassador from Mexico. They sat down in Washington, D.C. and had a discussion about how to do this better, how to get over this arguing and even litigation from some local people in Mexico. So they agreed that we should do something differently, and that what was different was to start communicating more frequently, not just about technical data, but also just about how things worked. We went forward with that helpful direction from very high levels in the government, and were able to then progressively build and move ourselves to the far end of that continuum. Hope that helped a bit.
Yeah, that's some good history. We have a ton of questions, and we're already far over our time. I think it's probably worth throwing a couple more out there, at least one more out there. Let's see here. I guess one of them that's really I think is very important to think about here came from so the question was would your research colleagues prefer ad hoc decisions to be taken every year in the question of sharing water under proposed collaboration? Okay, I'm sorry. Would you prefer ad hoc decisions to be taken every year in the question, or should there be instead an institutional framework with priority guidelines, such as flood protection, drinking water supply, hydropower, more of a prioritized regional type coordination, as opposed to sort of a temporal short coordination? Now, I'm going to give a quick response to that. And then I'd like to pass it on to others. So one of the things that Dr. Fulton mentioned was the notion of in U.S. Mexico, they tried to get a longer agreement that would be more comprehensive, but that proved to be extremely difficult to do. And the desire for something shorter seemed to be something more reasonable to do. So while there might be sort of a desire to have something comprehensive, it just might not have been practical, but it provided some first steps. So maybe to answer that question in terms of the temporal aspect, year-to-year agreements versus a short-term agreement versus a longer-term agreement, maybe if we direct that back to Dr. Saleh and to think about, well, to reflect on sort of the very short term, maybe periodic, a test term, like a pilot type agreement versus a long-term agreement. Could you reflect a little bit on that, Dr. Saleh, in terms of different temporal levels of agreements?
Sorry, Dr. I am not following you.
Well, so the question is really a year-to-year type agreement, as Dr. Yilma had expressed, versus a short-term agreement that maybe lasts 5 or 10 years to help build some trust, versus a long-term agreement, a more permanent established agreement. Could you reflect a little bit more on sort of that temporal aspect of what you think might be feasible?
I am afraid this is a very tough question, but generally in reservoir operations, you know that to come to the normal operation rule of any reservoir, it takes some time. At least, for example, some dams may take up to 10 years to come to a normal operation rule. If you are talking about 5 years or just a feeling or something like that, this type of agreement, when you are talking about the interest about countries, I don't think it will work, simply because you find some, especially the downstream, will be as very short time will be as if he didn't do anything. He will be left with, as if there is no agreement. So the very short period of agreement for reservoirs is not a visible solution. But we agree that this agreement should be revised at certain time. The other point that you cannot leave the system without an agreement. That is mean you can make some agreement tied with some limited time, but the next one that replace should be in place before you terminate this one. Because simply you are risking the whole system. If you are just terminating, say, an agreement in a transboundary river and then leave the system without, you are bringing people back to the zero square where again tensions and so on. And that is not the goal of agreements in transboundary. The goal is to optimize the resource, to also to have sustainable solution to keep the region in sustainable development and peace without tensions and so on. So these are the overall goals of agreements. It is not just to say a temporary agreement of 5, 6, or 10 years and then to leave the system without agreement. That will not achieve the goal. Thank you.
Yeah, and part of the reason why that probably worked on the Colorado River is there was a default position that had already been established. On the Nile, there is no default position right now. So the stronger need for continuity is there. So I do appreciate that response for sure. We are 45 minutes beyond when we had this planned. So Azeb, I wonder if you have any other thoughts right now that you'd like to give.
I was going through the question and most of them are answered, so maybe we don't have to go through that. But one interesting question which was given by Dr. Maha and given to all participants was stated like this. So in case of zero cooperation, what are the mitigation measures, and would like to see different cooperation scenarios? Now, we have seen with cooperation is maximum. So let us see when cooperation is 15% and when it's 0%. What are the technical mitigation realistic and reasonable measures that you propose? So it's given for all. Maybe the panelists can say something on that.
What about if we directed that towards someone who knows dams, like Mansour? I think he'd be an excellent person that has his hands on the dams, that understands the risks, the benefits and the risks of cooperation. Is there something intermediate that you could think of, Mansour, in terms of middle of the road or full integration versus full conflict? What does that middle look like to you?
Mansour, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Okay. Regarding the dam operation, the sharing of information is very important and very crucial for the dam operation. So every dam is one of the water system. So when you want to operate water system, you operate it within the space of the time and space of the spatial. So the location of the water, whether it's upstream or downstream, is very important, and also the time for the peak and the time for the drought and the time for the drawdown and the time of the starting of the filling, the time of everything. Then it's temporal. It's a temporal aspect. Without sharing information, the operation of the downstream dam is very, 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 very hard. And also many of times the reservoir could fail to fill to the operation level because you have to start the filling at a certain time and you have to finish the filling at a certain time. You have to start the drawdown at a certain time and you have to release a certain amount at a certain time. And this is the operation of the dams. So when I see the cooperation, and especially in at the minimum level of cooperation, that exchanging of data and information is very important for the dam operation. And at the higher level, it would be like a collaboration or elaboration, and then there will be big benefit. I think Dr. Kevin and others, they have a paper, and there's some details. You can refer to this paper, and there's a lot of information for cooperation versus no cooperation. But it is very important and very crucial that there should be a minimum level of cooperation. Should be, it is compulsory and it is very important and should be, otherwise there will be a disaster. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Azeb?
Thank you. I think you have given us a more practical view. So I think we can finalize our webinar. We have very fruitful discussion and very good insight from the presenter and from the panelists. What do you think, Kevin? Shall we conclude?
Yeah, I think it's time for us to conclude.
Okay, so let me present to you some of the key messages which I jotted down. Can you see my screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So we have seen that the Nile Basin gives a lot of potential for cooperation, even though there is a lot of struggle with water demand for irrigation and for hydropower. With the population growth and future climate change, we can still cooperate and get maximum benefit out of it. And realizing the economic potential of the basin requires targeted technical support in order to overcome barriers to joint management and of land and water resource. So for basis of such kind of cooperation is joint planning and managing of the water resource infrastructure, such as finding optimal operation of dams and reservoir operation, which brings win-win for all the country, Nile Basin countries. So these are the main points which we selected. Extreme events such as flood and drought can be mitigated through data sharing and coordination operation and giving more public awareness. The need for robust technique to understand the temporal change in land and water can be mitigated, and we need to have technical affirmation to build trust between decision makers, and having a personal relation is also one positive addition if we have that. The coordination between upstream and downstream dams is essential for maximum utilization of water resource in the basin and resource sharing between riparian countries. And trade-off have been mentioned a lot between sector and between various location of demand, and multi-objective reservoir operation, optimization, and water efficiency can be used to facilitate different kind of benefit sharing between countries. And we have seen that political will plays bigger role for Nile Basin, even though the technical people agreed in different matters, having a political will is major. And all relevant stakeholders and institutional engagement is vital for a successful coordination of dams in the Nile Basin. That's all what I captured from my end. Maybe if I miss anything, Kevin, can you chip in? Thank you.
I think you covered it pretty well, and I wish we could go on and answer more questions and have engagement from all the speakers, but unfortunately we're far over time.
Yeah.
So we're going to end it now. I really appreciate the participation of all of the speakers, of our panelists, and thanking Dr. Fulp and Dr. Saleh for joining us, as well as all of the speakers from across the world. And it is pretty remarkable if we think about the breadth of people we had for this. So we hope these conversations continue. This will be posted. The questions that are out there, we'd love to continue trying to answer those. Please do stay in touch and tune into the following Nile Basin Nbdf presentations that will go on for the remainder of the month through, I believe, to the end of April. But I think that can bring us to a close. And Thank you for everyone that woke up early in the morning and stayed up late tonight.
Yes, thank you very much. And have a nice day.